The dust cloud rose 20 feet high behind the galloping mare, a testament to the speed at which horse and rider thundered across the Nevada desert toward Rhyolite. And atop that racing animal stood a woman balanced on the saddle with her arms spread wide like wings, her dark hair streaming behind her like a banner of defiance. Vincent Marlowe had seen many things in his 32 years on this earth, had witnessed bank robberies and shootouts, had watched men die and others find redemption. But nothing in his life had prepared him for the sight of this woman standing upright on a horse moving at full gallop. He opened his mouth to shout a warning, some cautionary words about the danger she courted, but something in the perfect control of her posture, the absolute confidence radiating from her every movement, made him close it again. Instead, he simply tipped his hat in acknowledgement of a skill he could only admire, watching as she guided the mare with nothing but the subtle shifts of her weight and the whispered commands that the wind carried away before he could hear them. The year was 1906, and Rhyolite was still clinging to its glory days, though the mines were beginning to show signs of depletion. Vincent had arrived 3 months earlier, drawn by word that the town still had opportunities for a man willing to work hard and keep his head down. He had purchased a small ranch on the outskirts, nothing fancy, just enough land to run a modest herd of cattle and maybe breed a few horses. He had left behind a past in Texas that he preferred not to discuss, though there was nothing criminal in it, just heartbreak and disappointment that had driven him to seek a fresh start in Nevada. The woman brought her horse to a gradual stop about 50 yards from where Vincent stood beside the fence of his property, and with a grace that seemed almost supernatural, she dropped back down into the saddle as smoothly as water flowing over stones. She turned the mare toward him, and for the first time he got a clear look at her face. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with striking features that spoke of determination and intelligence. Her clothes were practical, the split skirt designed for riding, the blouse simple but well made, and everything about her suggested capability and independence. "I hope I did not startle your animals," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the distance between them. "I know that kind of riding can spook other horses." Vincent walked closer to the fence line, his boots crunching on the dry earth. "They seem fine, though I cannot speak for myself. That was quite a display." She urged her mare forward until only the fence separated them. Up close, he could see that her eyes were a remarkable shade of green, like the surface of a river under spring sunlight. "Felicity Preston," she said, extending her hand across the fence rail. "I run the Preston Ranch about 3 miles north of here." He shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that spoke of hard work. "Vincent Marlowe, I am your new neighbor, it seems, just bought the Hendricks place." "Ah, so you are the one." Felicity smiled, and it transformed her entire face, adding warmth to the striking features. "People in town have been curious. We do not get many newcomers anymore, not with the mines starting to play out." "I am not here for the mines," Vincent said. "I came for the land. There is still good ranching to be had if a man is willing to work for it." "Or a woman," Felicity added, and though her tone was light, he heard the edge beneath it, the defensiveness of someone who had probably fought many battles to be taken seriously in a world dominated by men. "Or a woman," he agreed easily. "That was remarkable riding, by the way." "I have never seen anything like it." Felicity's expression softened with genuine pleasure at the compliment. "My father taught me. He worked in a Wild West show for a few years before he settled here and married my mother. He said that if I was going to ride, I should learn every skill there was, not just the proper lady's seat that satisfied social convention." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was." The past tense hung in the air between them. "He passed 4 years ago." My mother followed him 2 years later. The ranch has been mine ever since." Vincent heard the weight of responsibility in those words, the burden of maintaining a property alone in a harsh and unforgiving landscape. "That must be difficult. I manage." She straightened in her saddle, and he recognized the gesture as one of pride refusing to bend into self-pity. "I have good hands who work for me, men who respected my father and have been decent enough to give me a chance to prove myself. But I will not pretend it has been easy. If you ever need help with anything, anything at all, I am just down the road," Vincent offered, surprising himself with the words even as he spoke them. He was generally a private man, one who kept to himself and did not insert himself into the business of others. Felicity studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his sincerity. "That is kind of you, Mr. Marlowe, and the same offer stands in return. We are neighbors now, and in this country that means something." She gathered her reins, preparing to leave, and Vincent felt an unexpected reluctance to see her go. "Will you be at the dance on Saturday?" he found himself asking. "I heard there is one at the community hall." "I might make an appearance," Felicity said, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Will you? I suppose I might as well. I have been here 3 months and barely spoken to anyone beyond business transactions. It is probably time I became part of the community." "Then perhaps I will see you there, Mr. Marlowe." She touched the brim of her hat in a gesture that mirrored the one he had given her earlier, and then she was off, the mare moving into an easy canter that carried them both north toward her property. Vincent watched her go, aware that something had shifted in his world, though he could not quite name what it was. He had not come to Nevada looking for romance or companionship. He had come to rebuild his life in solitude, to heal from wounds that time had dulled but not erased. Yet something about Felicity Preston had penetrated the walls he had built around himself, and as he turned back toward his ranch house, he found himself thinking about Saturday night with an anticipation he had not felt in years. The next few days passed in the usual rhythm of ranch work. Vincent rose before dawn, tended to his animals, repaired fence lines, and worked on the numerous improvements the property needed. The Hendricks family had let the place run down in their final years, and there was much to be done. But the work was satisfying in a way that his previous life had not been. There was honesty in physical labor, in seeing the direct results of his efforts transform the land around him. He found his thoughts drifting to Felicity more often than he cared to admit. The memory of her standing on that saddle, so perfectly balanced and in control, played through his mind during quiet moments. There had been something almost mythical about it, like watching a figure from ancient legend made flesh and blood. He wondered what drove her to take such risks. What inner fire compelled her to push beyond the boundaries that society tried to impose? Saturday arrived with a bright clarity that made the desert shimmer like water under the afternoon sun. Vincent bathed carefully, shaved and dressed in his best clothes, which were still fairly simple but clean and well-maintained. He felt a nervousness that seemed ridiculous for a man of his age and experience, but he could not shake it. He told himself it was just the natural anxiety of attending a social function where he knew almost no one. But he knew that was only part of the truth. The community hall was a simple wooden structure in the center of Rhyolite, one of the few buildings that served a purpose beyond commerce or residence. By the time Vincent arrived, the dance was already in full swing, the sound of fiddle music spilling out into the street along with laughter and conversation. He paused at the entrance, gathering his courage, and then stepped inside. The hall was crowded with people, ranchers and miners and shopkeepers and their families, all dressed in their finest and clearly determined to enjoy themselves. Vincent had barely crossed the threshold when he spotted Felicity on the far side of the room, talking with a group of women near the refreshment table. She wore a dress of deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and her hair was pinned up in a style that was both elegant and practical. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up, and their eyes met across the crowded room. She excused herself from her companions and made her way toward him, navigating through the clusters of dancing couples with ease. "Mr. Marlowe," she said warmly, "you came." "I said I might," he replied, trying to keep his tone casual despite the way his heart had accelerated at her approach. "And please call me Vincent. Then you must call me Felicity." She glanced toward the dancers, then back at him. "Do you dance, Vincent?" "I know the basic steps, though I cannot claim any particular grace or skill." "That makes two of us," she said with a laugh. "But I find that enthusiasm often compensates for technique. Would you care to try?" He offered his hand, and she took it, and then they were moving onto the floor, joining the other couples in a lively reel. She had been modest about her abilities, he discovered quickly. She moved with the same natural grace she showed on horseback, and he found it easy to follow her lead even when his own feet felt clumsy and uncertain. "You are a much better dancer than you claimed," he said during a brief pause in the music. "And you are not as bad as you suggested," she countered. "I think we both undersold ourselves." The fiddler struck up a slower tune, and the dancers shifted into pairs for a waltz. Vincent drew Felicity closer, feeling the warmth of her hand in his, the subtle pressure of her other hand on his shoulder. They moved together in easy synchronization, and he was aware of how perfectly they seemed to fit, how natural it felt to hold her like this. "Tell me about Texas," she said quietly. "That is where you are from, is it not? I can hear it in your accent, faint but still there. How did you know? I have an ear for such things." "My father traveled extensively before settling here, and he taught me to recognize the different regional dialects. So, Texas." Vincent hesitated, old habits of privacy warring with a surprising desire to share himself with this woman. "Yes, Texas. A town called Amarillo. I had a small ranch there, worked it with my father and brother." "Had? My father died 5 years ago, and my brother and I disagreed about how to run the place. He wanted to modernize, to take on debt, to expand. I wanted to stay cautious, to build slowly. We argued constantly, and eventually I realized that staying would poison our relationship completely, so I sold him my share and left." Felicity was quiet for a moment, her green eyes thoughtful. "That must have been painful." "It was necessary," Vincent said, "and in many ways it was a relief. I loved my brother, still do, but we had become different men with different visions. Better to part as friends than to stay and become enemies." "I understand that," Felicity said softly. "Sometimes the hardest thing is recognizing when it is time to let go, even of things we love." They danced in comfortable silence for a while, and Vincent found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did around people. There was something about Felicity that put him at ease, that made him feel understood without having to explain himself at length. "What about you?" he asked eventually. "Have you always lived in Rhyolite?" "No, I was born in California, in Sacramento. My parents moved here when I was 12, drawn by the mining boom. My father had grown tired of the show circuit, and my mother wanted a stable home. Rhyolite seemed like the perfect place, full of opportunity and promise." She smiled sadly. "That was 23 years ago, and the town has seen better days since then. But you stayed. Where else would I go? This is my home, and the ranch is my legacy from my parents. I cannot just abandon it, even if the practical thing would be to sell and move somewhere with a more certain future." Vincent understood that sentiment completely. He had felt the same loyalty to his own family land, though in the end, He had chosen to leave rather than watch it become a source of conflict. "The practical thing is not always the right thing," he said. "No," Felicity agreed. "It is not." The dance ended, and they moved to the side of the floor, finding seats along the wall. Someone brought them cups of punch, and they sat together talking, the conversation flowing easily from one topic to another. Vincent learned that Felicity loved books, that she had a collection of novels and poetry that she had inherited from her mother and added to over the years. She learned that he had a talent for working with horses, that he could gentle even the most difficult animals with patience and understanding. The evening passed quickly, and Vincent was surprised when he glanced out the window and saw that full darkness had fallen. The party was beginning to wind down, families with children leaving first, and he realized with reluctance that it was probably time for him to go as well. "May I escort you home?" he asked Felicity. She looked at him with amusement. "I rode here on horseback, Vincent. I am perfectly capable of riding home alone." "I know that," he said quickly. "I just thought, well, it would give us a bit more time to talk." Her expression softened. "That would be nice. Thank you." They collected their horses from where they had been tethered outside and rode north together through the cool desert night. The moon was nearly full, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow, and the silence between them was companionable rather than awkward. When they reached the point where Vincent would need to turn off toward his own property, they stopped. "Thank you for the escort," Felicity said. "And for the dances." "Thank you for making a newcomer feel welcome," Vincent replied. "I enjoyed this evening more than I expected to. Perhaps we could do it again sometime. Not a dance necessarily, but spending time together. I find your company remarkably pleasant, Vincent Marlowe." His heart lifted at her words. "I would like that very much. And I find your company more than pleasant, Felicity Preston. I find it quite extraordinary." She smiled, her face luminous in the moonlight. "Good night, Vincent." "Good night, Felicity." He watched her ride away until she disappeared into the darkness, and then he turned his own horse toward home, feeling lighter than he had in years. Something was beginning between them, something fragile and new but full of promise, and for the first time since leaving Texas, he felt that he had made the right choice in coming to Nevada. The following weeks established a pattern that became the foundation of their growing relationship. Vincent would ride over to Felicity's ranch on some pretext, offering help with a difficult task or bringing by something he thought she might need. She would accept graciously, and they would work together, talking as they labored, learning more about each other with each passing day. Other times, she would appear at his property, ostensibly to return the favor but really because, as she admitted one afternoon, she enjoyed his company and wanted to see him. Vincent found himself falling for her in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. After the heartbreak that had driven him from Texas, a failed engagement to a woman who had ultimately chosen security over love, he had convinced himself that he was done with romance, that he would live out his days as a solitary rancher with his animals and his land for company. But Felicity was undoing all those careful resolutions, breaking through his defenses with her combination of strength and vulnerability, her quick wit and genuine warmth. One afternoon in late spring, about 2 months after they had first met, Vincent was working on repairing his barn roof when he heard hoofbeats approaching at speed. He looked up to see Felicity riding toward him, and immediately knew something was wrong. She never pushed her horses like that without good reason, and her expression was tense and worried. "Vincent," she called out as she pulled up in front of the barn, "I need your help. One of my mares is having trouble foaling and I cannot handle it alone. My foreman is in town getting supplies, and the other hands are out on the range. Can you come?" "Of course." He was down the ladder in seconds, grabbing his hat and following her to where both their horses waited. They rode hard back to her ranch, the miles disappearing under the pounding hooves, and Vincent sent up a silent prayer that they would arrive in time. The mare was in the barn, lying on her side in obvious distress, her breathing labored and her eyes rolling with pain and fear. Vincent had helped with many difficult births over the years, both with cattle and horses, and he assessed the situation quickly. The foal was positioned wrong, and without intervention, both mother and baby would likely die. "I am going to need your help," he told Felicity calmly, though his heart was racing. "This is going to be difficult and it is not going to be pleasant. Are you up for it? Tell me what to do," she said firmly, and he heard no hesitation in her voice. They worked together for the better part of an hour, Vincent talking soothingly to the mare while carefully repositioning the foal, Felicity assisting with steady hands and following his instructions precisely. It was exhausting, intense work, and there were moments when Vincent feared they would lose them both. But finally, with one last tremendous effort from the mare, the foal slid free, wet and steaming in the cool air of the barn. Vincent cleared the membrane from the foal's face and nose, and after a heart-stopping moment, the little creature took its first gasping breath. The mare, exhausted but alive, turned her head to nuzzle her baby, and Vincent sat back on his heels, relief flooding through him. "You did it," Felicity said, her voice thick with emotion. "Vincent, you saved them both." "We did it," he corrected, looking up at her. "I could not have managed without your help." She was kneeling beside him in the straw, her dress stained and her hair coming loose from its pins, and he thought he had never seen anyone more beautiful. Without thinking, acting purely on instinct and the emotions of the moment, he reached out and cupped her face with his hand. "Felicity," he said softly. She leaned into his touch, her green eyes searching his face. "Yes, I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and impossible to take back. For a moment, he feared he had made a terrible mistake, that he had moved too fast and would drive her away. But then she smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "I think I have been falling in love with you since the day I saw you tip your hat instead of shouting warnings at me," she said. "Most men would have yelled at me for being reckless, would have tried to tell me what I should and should not do. But you just acknowledged what I could do and respected it. Do you know how rare that is?" He moved closer, and she met him halfway, and then they were kissing, soft and tentative at first, then with growing passion and certainty. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Vincent felt as though something fundamental had shifted in the universe, as though everything that had come before had been leading to this moment. "I love you," he said again, because the words felt too good to say just once. "I love your strength and your courage and your independence. I love the way you stand on your saddle like you are defying the whole world to try and stop you. I love everything about you, Felicity Preston." "And I love you, Vincent Marlowe," she said, her eyes bright with happy tears. "I love your kindness and your skill, and the way you see me as an equal rather than someone who needs to be managed or controlled. I love the way you listen when I talk, and the way you trust me to help with difficult things. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." They stayed in the barn until the foal was nursing successfully, and the mare seemed fully recovered, but they barely noticed the passage of time, too caught up in each other and the newness of acknowledged love. When they finally emerged into the late afternoon sunlight, holding hands like much younger people, Vincent felt as though he had been reborn. "What happens now?" Felicity asked, leaning against him as they stood watching the desert landscape shimmer in the heat. "I suppose we figure that out together," Vincent said. I know what I want, but I am not going to rush you. We can take as much time as you need." "What do you want?" He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I want to marry you. I want to combine our ranches and build something together. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to have children with you and grow old watching them grow up on this land. I want everything, Felicity, all of it, if you will have me." She was crying openly now, but he could see that they were tears of joy rather than sadness. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it. I want the same things, Vincent. I want to be your wife and your partner. I want to build a life with you." He swept her into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure happiness. And for a moment, all the hardships of their individual pasts seemed to fade into insignificance. They had found each other against all odds, two wounded souls who had each been searching for something without quite knowing what it was. And now, they had discovered it in the most unexpected way. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Rhyolite, with the entire town turning out to witness the union. Felicity wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in tissue paper for years, and Vincent wore a new suit that he had ordered specially from a catalog. They spoke their vows with voices that shook with emotion, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by everyone present and greeted with cheers and applause. The reception was held at the community hall, the same place where they had first danced together, and it seemed fitting to Vincent that they should celebrate this new beginning in the location of that earlier meeting. They danced together multiple times, and he held her close and marveled at how his life had changed in such a short time. He had come to Nevada seeking solitude and found instead the greatest love he had ever known. After the reception, they rode together to Vincent's ranch, which they had agreed would become their primary home since it was larger and had better water access. They would keep Felicity's property as well, running it as an extension of their main operation, but the house where Vincent had been living alone would now become their shared home. He carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition, and set her down gently in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Marlowe," he said softly. "Mrs. Marlowe," she repeated, as if testing how the name felt. "I like the sound of that, though I hope you will not mind if I still go by Preston in some business contexts. People know me by that name, and it was my father's legacy." "I would never ask you to give up your name or your identity," Vincent assured her. "You are still Felicity Preston, and you always will be. The Marlowe part is just an addition, not a replacement." She kissed him deeply, and he felt desire flare hot and urgent between them. They had been careful to maintain propriety during their engagement, though there had been many stolen kisses and passionate embraces that had left them both aching for more. But now there were no barriers between them, no need to hold back, and they came together with an intensity born of weeks of restraint finally released. Later, lying tangled together in his bed, their bed now, Vincent traced lazy patterns on Felicity's bare shoulder and felt a contentment so profound it was almost overwhelming. "I never thought I would feel this way again," he said quietly. "After what happened in Texas, I convinced myself that I was not meant for this kind of happiness." Felicity turned to look at him, her hair spread across the pillow like a dark halo. "What happened in Texas? You mentioned a disagreement with your brother, but I sensed there was more to it than that." Vincent sighed, knowing that he owed her the full truth now that they were married. "There was a woman named Charlotte. We were engaged to be married, had been for almost a year, but as the wedding approached, she started to change. She kept pressing me to expand the ranch faster, to take bigger risks. When I refused, she began making comparisons to my brother, to his ambition and willingness to modernize. Eventually, she broke off our engagement, and within a month, she was courting a banker from Dallas, a man who could give her the kind of life she really wanted. "I am sorry," Felicity said, genuine sympathy in her voice. "That must have been terribly painful." "It was devastating at the time," Vincent admitted. "I questioned everything about myself, wondered if I was too cautious, too set in my ways. And the situation with my brother became impossible after that because he defended Charlotte, said she was right to want more. That is when I knew I had to leave. I could not stay in a place where I was constantly reminded of my failures and inadequacies." Felicity propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with fierce intensity. "You are not a failure, Vincent Marlowe. You are thoughtful and careful, and you build things meant to last rather than flash brightly and burn out. Charlotte was a fool to let you go, and you are better off without someone who did not value what you had to offer." "I know that now," he said, pulling her back down against him. "Because I found you. You are everything Charlotte was not. You are strong in your own right. You do not need me to provide status or wealth. You chose me for who I am, not for what I could give you." "I chose you because you are the best man I have ever known," Felicity said simply. "And because loving you is as natural as breathing." The first year of their marriage was a time of adjustment and growth. They merged their two ranching operations, which required careful planning and hard work from both of them. Felicity's hands were initially skeptical about taking orders from Vincent, but he won them over through competence and respect, never pulling rank or treating them as lesser simply because they worked for his wife's family before the marriage. He learned from them as well, discovering new techniques for managing cattle in the harsh Nevada environment, and Felicity appreciated that he was willing to acknowledge their expertise. They settled into comfortable routines, dividing the work according to their individual strengths while still making all major decisions together. Vincent handled most of the heavy physical labor and the horse training, while Felicity managed the books and maintained relationships with their buyers and suppliers. But they were both capable of stepping into each other's roles when needed, and that flexibility strengthened both their operation and their relationship. The town of Rhyolite continued its slow decline as the mines played out, but the Marlowe ranch prospered. They had water and good grazing land, and their reputation for quality cattle and well-trained horses spread throughout the region. By the end of their first year together, they were able to hire additional hands and purchase more breeding stock, slowly expanding in the careful, sustainable way that Vincent had always preferred. Their personal happiness grew alongside their business success. They discovered small joys in each other's company. The way Felicity would read aloud to Vincent in the evenings from her beloved books, or how he would surprise her with wildflowers picked on his rides around the property. They learned to fight fair when disagreements arose, respecting each other enough to listen and compromise rather than digging into stubborn positions. And their physical passion, rather than fading with familiarity, seemed to deepen and intensify, finding new dimensions of intimacy and connection. In the spring of their second year together, Felicity announced that she was pregnant. Vincent received the news with a mixture of joy and terror, thrilled at the prospect of becoming a father but acutely aware of the dangers that childbirth posed to women, especially in a remote location far from sophisticated medical care. He became almost obsessively protective, insisting that Felicity cut back on the more dangerous aspects of ranch work, but she resisted his attempts to wrap her in cotton wool. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him firmly after he tried to prevent her from riding one of the more spirited horses. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Vincent, and most of them worked right up until the moment they went into labor. I will not spend the next 6 months sitting in a chair like an invalid. I just want you to be safe, he said, his anxiety clear in his voice. I cannot lose you, Felicity. If anything happened to you, I would not survive it. Her expression softened and she came to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Nothing is going to happen to me. I am strong and healthy and we will be fine, both the baby and me. But you need to trust me to know my own limits. I promise I will be careful, but I need to still be myself. He held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. All right, he said finally. I will try to be less of a mother hen, but if you feel tired or unwell at any point, you have to promise you will tell me immediately. I promise, she said, and sealed it with a kiss. She kept her word, continuing to work on the ranch throughout her pregnancy, but respecting her body's changing needs. As her belly swelled with their growing child, Vincent found himself marveling at the miracle of it, this new life they had created together. He would lie awake at night with his hand resting on her stomach, feeling the baby kick and move, and be overcome with a love so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. In late November, as winter began to settle over the Nevada desert, Felicity went into labor. They had arranged for a midwife from town to attend the birth, an experienced woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered most of the babies in Rhyolite over the past 20 years. Vincent paced the floor of their bedroom while Mrs. Henderson and one of the ranch wives attended to Felicity, feeling utterly helpless and terrified. The labor lasted 14 hours, long enough that Vincent began to fear the worst. He could hear Felicity's cries through the closed door, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. But finally, just as dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon, he heard a new sound, the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the bedroom, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Marlowe, and your wife is doing just fine. She is a strong woman, one of the strongest I have ever attended." Vincent barely heard the last part. He was already pushing past the midwife into the bedroom, his eyes searching for Felicity. She was propped up against the pillows, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion but glowing with joy, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Vincent," she said softly, "come meet your son." He approached almost reverently, sinking down onto the edge of the bed and looking at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, and Vincent felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He is perfect," Vincent whispered, touching one tiny hand with his finger. Immediately, the baby's fingers curled around his, gripping with surprising strength. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Felicity asked. "We discussed several options, but nothing we agreed on definitively." Vincent thought about his own father, who had been a good man despite their ultimate disagreements. He thought about the new life they were building here in Nevada, far from the disappointments of the past. "Thomas," he said finally. "Thomas Andrew Marlowe, if that suits you." "Andrew was my father's middle name." "Thomas Andrew Marlowe," Felicity repeated, looking down at their son. "I think that suits him perfectly. Welcome to the world, Tommy." The months that followed were some of the most exhausting and rewarding of Vincent's life. Tommy proved to be a colicky baby who cried frequently and slept irregularly. And both Vincent and Felicity spent many long nights walking the floor with him, taking turns so that the other could catch a few hours of rest. But even in the midst of the exhaustion, there were moments of such profound beauty and connection that Vincent felt blessed beyond measure. He loved watching Felicity with their son, the tenderness and competence with which she handled him, the way she would sing soft lullabies as she nursed him. He loved the way Tommy would focus on his face when he held him, as if trying to memorize every feature. He loved being a father in a way he had not anticipated, discovering reserves of patience and gentleness within himself that he had not known existed. As Tommy grew, he began to show signs of his parents' personalities. He had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair, and he seemed to inherit Felicity's fearlessness and Vincent's careful observation. By his first birthday, he was walking steadily and getting into everything, requiring constant supervision lest he injure himself in one of his explorations. The ranch continued to prosper, and by the time Tommy was 2 years old, Vincent and Felicity had expanded their operation significantly. They now ran over 500 head of cattle and had established a reputation as premier horse breeders. Buyers came from as far away as California and Arizona to purchase their animals, and the financial security they had built allowed them to make improvements to both the house and the land. But more important than the material success was the happiness they had created together. Their love had not diminished with time or the demands of parenthood and ranching. If anything, it had grown deeper and richer, tempered by shared challenges and sweetened by shared victories. They were true partners in every sense of the word, each supporting and complementing the other. One afternoon in early summer, when Tommy was 3 years old, Vincent came in from the range to find Felicity sitting at the kitchen table with a peculiar expression on her face. "Is something wrong?" he asked immediately, concern flaring. "Not wrong exactly," she said slowly. "Just unexpected. Vincent, I am pregnant again." He felt a wave of emotions, joy and fear and excitement all mixed together. "That is wonderful," he said, coming to kneel beside her chair. "Isn't it?" "I think so," she said, her hand moving unconsciously to her still flat stomach. "I know we had talked about wanting more children eventually, but I had thought we would wait a bit longer. Tommy is still so young, and managing the ranch with one small child is already challenging." "We will manage," Vincent assured her. "We always do, and Tommy will love having a little brother or sister." She smiled at his optimism. "You are probably right, and honestly I am excited, terrified but excited. This pregnancy was easier than the first had been." Felicity experienced less sickness and fatigue, and her body seemed to remember what it needed to do. She continued working almost until the day she went into labor, though Vincent still worried and fussed over her in ways that made her alternately exasperated and touched. Their daughter was born on a crisp October morning, arriving so quickly that Mrs. Henderson barely made it in time. Unlike her brother, she was a calm, peaceful baby from the start, rarely crying and sleeping through the night within her first month. They named her Eleanor Rose Marlowe, after Felicity's mother and Vincent's maternal grandmother, and she was welcomed into their family with overwhelming love. Tommy was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and constantly asking to hold her. Vincent and Felicity supervised carefully, teaching him to be gentle, and the bond between the siblings began to form immediately. Eleanor would track Tommy with her eyes whenever he was in the room, and he would talk to her constantly, telling her about his day and all the things he would teach her when she was bigger. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch continued to thrive, weathering occasional setbacks like droughts or difficult winters, but always recovering and growing stronger. Vincent and Felicity added more land to their holdings when a neighboring rancher retired and sold his property, and they diversified their operation to include some crop farming in addition to the cattle and horses. Rhyolite itself was not so fortunate. As the mines continued to fail, more and more people left, seeking opportunities elsewhere. The population that had once numbered in the thousands dwindled to hundreds, and many of the grand buildings that had been constructed during the boom years were abandoned. Vincent and Felicity watched the town's decline with sadness, but they remained committed to the area. They had built their life here, and they would not abandon it simply because times were difficult. They became pillars of the community that remained, helping to support the church and the school, offering work to people who had lost mining jobs, and serving as a reminder that prosperity was still possible with hard work and careful management. People began to look to them for guidance and leadership, and they accepted the responsibility seriously, always trying to be generous while maintaining the discipline needed to keep their own operation healthy. Tommy grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses and the outdoors. By the time he was 8 years old, he could ride as well as most adults and was beginning to help with the ranch work in meaningful ways. He had his father's patience and his mother's courage, and Vincent could see him growing into someone who would carry on their legacy with pride and skill. Eleanor was quieter than her brother, but no less determined. She loved reading like her mother and would spend hours poring over books, but she also insisted on learning every aspect of ranch life. By 6 years old, she could help with basic chores and was beginning to learn to ride. She had a gift for connecting with animals, particularly horses, and Vincent suspected she might eventually surpass all of them in that regard. One evening, when Tommy was 10 and Eleanor was 7, the family sat together on the porch watching the sun set over the desert. It was a ritual they observed often, this quiet time together at the end of the day, and Vincent treasured these moments of peace and connection. "Papa," Tommy said suddenly, "tell us again about how you and Mama met." Vincent smiled, exchanging a glance with Felicity. They had told the story many times, but their children never seemed to tire of hearing it. "Well," he began, "I was standing by the fence of our property doing some repair work when I saw a dust cloud in the distance. As it got closer, I realized it was a horse and rider moving at full gallop. And then I saw something that I had never seen before and have never seen since. Mama was standing on the saddle," Eleanor chimed in, unable to contain herself. "That is right," Vincent confirmed. "Your mama was standing on the saddle, perfectly balanced, riding that horse like she was part of the wind itself. I started to open my mouth to shout a warning, but then I saw how completely in control she was, and I realized that would be insulting. So instead, I just tipped my hat and shut my mouth, showing respect for her skill. And that is when Mama knew you were different from other men," Tommy added, knowing this part by heart. "I did know that," Felicity agreed, reaching over to take Vincent's hand. "Most men would have reacted with fear or anger, would have tried to tell me I was being reckless or foolish. But your father simply acknowledged what I could do and respected it. That told me everything I needed to know about the kind of man he was. And you fell in love," Eleanor said dreamily, "and got married and had us." "That is the simplified version," Vincent said with a laugh. "But yes, essentially that is what happened. Your mother and I fell in love, built a life together, and created the greatest treasures we could ever have, which are the two of you." Both children groaned at the sentimentality, but Vincent could see they were pleased. They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, and Vincent felt the same profound contentment that he experienced during these family moments. "I love you," he said quietly to Felicity, too soft for the children to hear. "I love you too," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Always." The years continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life and the milestones of their children's growth. Tommy turned into a young man, tall and strong, with his father's steady disposition and his mother's independent spirit. He started courting a girl from one of the neighboring ranches, a sensible young woman named Sarah who was practical and kind. And Vincent gave his blessing when Tommy asked permission to marry her at age 21. Elena grew into a striking young woman with her mother's green eyes and a quiet confidence that drew people to her. She was less interested in marriage than her brother had been, preferring to focus on the horse breeding program she had developed at the ranch. She had a gift for identifying promising bloodlines and for training horses with extraordinary skill, and under her guidance, the Marlowe horses became even more sought after than before. Vincent and Felicity watched their children's growth with pride and occasional wistfulness, aware that the years were passing and their own youth was fading. But they faced the advancing years together, their love for each other undiminished by time. If anything, the decades they had shared had only strengthened their bond, adding layers of shared memory and experience that enriched every interaction. When Vincent turned 65 and Felicity was 60, they decided it was time to begin transitioning the ranch to the next generation. Tommy and Sarah had given them 3 grandchildren, and Elena had finally met a young veterinarian from Carson City who had won her heart through his skill with animals and his respect for her expertise. They were planning to marry in the coming year, and he would be joining the ranch operation. The transition was gradual and careful, Vincent and Felicity teaching everything they knew to their children and the next generation, ensuring that the legacy they had built would continue long after they were gone. But they did not retire completely. They still worked on the ranch when they felt able, still offered guidance when it was needed, and still treasured their time together. One afternoon in late spring, when they had been married for 43 years, Vincent and Felicity rode out together to a ridge that overlooked their property. They often came here when they wanted privacy and perspective, and today was no different. They sat on their horses side by side, looking out over the land they had shaped and nurtured for so long. "You ever regret it?" Vincent asked suddenly. "Choosing this life, marrying me, all of it?" Felicity looked at him with surprise. "Regret it? Vincent, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. This life we have built together, our children and grandchildren, the ranch, everything, it is more than I ever dreamed possible when I was a young woman standing on that saddle. I just sometimes wonder if you might have had an easier life with someone else," he admitted. "Someone with more ambition, more drive to expand and take risks." "I did not want easy," Felicity said firmly, "and I did not want reckless ambition. I wanted exactly what I got, a partner who respected me and loved me and built something real and lasting with me. You gave me that, Vincent Marlowe. You gave me everything that matters." He reached across the space between their horses and took her hand, marveling as he always did at how perfectly it still fit with his. "I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you since that first day, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," she replied, her eyes bright with tears. "You are my great adventure, Vincent. Standing on that saddle at full gallop was exciting, but it was nothing compared to the adventure of building a life with you." They sat there until the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. And then they rode back to the ranch house together, their horses walking side by side just as they had walked through life, partners in every sense of the word. Vincent Marlowe lived to the age of 79, still working on the ranch he loved almost until the end. He died peacefully in his sleep on a warm summer night, with Felicity beside him as she had been for 57 years. His last words to her were, "Thank you for everything," and she held his hand as he slipped away, her heart breaking even as she felt gratitude for the extraordinary life they had shared. Felicity lived for 3 more years, long enough to see her great-grandchildren born, and to ensure that the ranch would continue to prosper for generations to come. She died at 76, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and her last words were about Vincent, about how she would be with him again soon, and how she had never stopped loving him for a single moment of their time apart. They were buried side by side on the ridge where they had so often ridden together, their graves marked by simple headstones that bore their names and the dates of their lives. But their real legacy was not in stone or earth. It was in the thriving ranch that bore their name, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their values and their love forward, in the community they had helped sustain through difficult times, and in the story that was still told in Rhyolite about the woman who stood on her saddle at full gallop and the cowboy who tipped his hat and shut his mouth, recognizing greatness when he saw it. The ranch continued for generations after their deaths, passing from child to child, each one adding their own contributions while honoring the foundation that Vincent and Felicity had established. The story of how the ranch began, of the unlikely meeting between two wounded souls who found healing and love in each other, became part of the family mythology, told and retold to each new generation as a reminder of what could be built when two people chose to face life together as true partners. Even as Rhyolite faded into a ghost town, as the last residents left and the buildings crumbled into the desert, the Marlowe Ranch remained, a testament to perseverance and love. Travelers passing through the area would sometimes stop to read the historical marker that had been erected years after Vincent and Felicity's deaths, telling the story of the remarkable couple who had built an empire through hard work and devotion to each other and the land. And sometimes, in the early morning light or the golden hours of evening, people claimed they could see two figures on horseback riding along the ridge, moving in perfect synchronization, their forms shimmering in the desert heat. The locals said it was Vincent and Felicity, still together even in death, still watching over the land and the family they had created, still in love after all the years and all the changes that time could bring. Whether the sightings were real or simply the product of desert mirages and wishful thinking did not really matter. What mattered was that Vincent and Felicity Marlowe had loved with a depth and commitment that few people ever achieve, and had created something that lasted far beyond their mortal years. Their story became a legend, not of gunslingers or gold strikes or the usual drama of the Wild West, but of something far more rare and precious: two people who found each other against all odds and built a love that truly lasted forever. The land they had nurtured continued to produce. The bloodlines they had carefully cultivated still ran through the horses that bore the Marlowe name, and the values they had instilled in their children, hard work, respect, partnership, and love, continued to guide the family through whatever challenges arose. They had started with a woman's daring ride and a man's respectful acknowledgement, and from that simple beginning, they had built an empire of the heart that no amount of time could diminish. In the end, that was their greatest achievement, not the acres they owned or the success of their ranch, but the love they shared and the example they set for all who came after. They proved that it was possible to be true partners, to respect and support each other without diminishing or controlling, to build something meaningful together while remaining fully themselves as individuals. And that legacy, more than any material success, was what made their story worth telling and remembering, generation after generation, as long as there were Marlowes in Nevada and people who believed that love, real love, was worth fighting for and building upon. Tommy's children and grandchildren continued to work the land, and Sarah's practical nature combined with the Marlowe determination created new generations of capable ranchers. Alina's descendants inherited her gift with horses, and the Marlowe breeding program became renowned throughout the West, with horses bearing their brand prized for their intelligence, strength, and gentle temperament. As the 20th century progressed and Nevada changed around them, as the Wild West became something preserved in museums and movies rather than a living reality, the Marlowe family adapted and evolved while holding fast to the core principles that Vincent and Felicity had established. They modernized their practices when it made sense to do so, but they never lost sight of the importance of sustainable growth, respect for the land and animals, and the value of true partnership in both business and personal relationships. The story of how it all began, with a woman standing on a saddle at full gallop and a man wise enough to tip his hat rather than shout warnings, remained central to the family's identity. It was told at weddings and anniversaries, shared with new spouses joining the family, recounted to children learning about their heritage. And in the telling and retelling, the love between Vincent and Felicity remained alive, inspiring each new generation to seek that same depth of connection and partnership in their own lives. Their great-great-grandchildren, living in an era of automobiles and airplanes, of electricity and modern medicine, still understood the essential truth of Vincent and Felicity's story that respect and love were timeless, that true partnership transcended the changing circumstances of any particular era, and that the greatest adventures were the ones shared with someone who saw you for exactly who you were and loved you all the more for it. The ranch house itself, expanded and improved over the generations, but still standing on the foundation that Vincent had built, contained reminders of the couple's presence everywhere. Photographs on the walls showed them at various stages of their lives, young and passionate, middle-aged and content, elderly and still clearly devoted. Felicity's books still lined the shelves in the library, and Vincent's tools still hung in the barn, carefully preserved and occasionally still used by family members who wanted to maintain that connection to their past. And on special occasions, the family would gather on that ridge where Vincent and Felicity were buried, where they had so often come to find perspective and privacy, and they would share stories and memories, keeping alive the legacy of love and partnership that had started it all. The younger children would ask to hear about the saddle trick, about how great-great-grandma Felicity had been so skilled and brave, and about how great-great-grandpa Vincent had been wise enough to recognize and respect her abilities rather than try to control or diminish them. The world changed dramatically over the decades following Vincent and Felicity's deaths. The Wild West disappeared, replaced by paved roads and subdivisions, by tourism and technology. But the Marlowe Ranch remained, a living link to that earlier time, a reminder that some things love, respect, hard work, and partnership never went out of style or lost their relevance. The family that carried on their name and their legacy knew that they stood on the shoulders of two extraordinary people who had dared to build something lasting in an uncertain world, and they were determined to honor that legacy in everything they did. And they would feel grateful, knowing that their own lives had been shaped and blessed by a love story that had started more than a century ago, but continued to resonate and inspire in the present day. That was the true magic of Vincent and Felicity Marlowe's story. It did not end with their deaths, or even with the deaths of their children and grandchildren. It continued, passed down through the generations, inspiring each new couple that joined the family to strive for that same level of partnership and devotion. It reminded them that love was not just a feeling but a choice, a daily commitment to respect and support and cherish the person you had chosen to share your life with. And it showed them that, when two people truly became partners, when they built something together based on mutual respect and genuine affection, They created a legacy that could withstand anything time threw at it. The ranch itself, still bearing the Marlowe name after all these years, stood as physical proof of what could be accomplished when two people worked together toward a common goal. The land that Vincent and Felicity had nurtured and improved had provided livelihoods for multiple generations, had weathered droughts and recessions, and all the various challenges that time could bring. And it had done so because it was built on a foundation of love and partnership that made it stronger than any property based solely on individual ambition or commercial calculation. Sometimes visitors to the area, people interested in Old West history or ranch life, would stop by and ask to hear the story of the Marlowe Ranch and how it began. And whoever was available would tell them about Felicity Preston, riding at full gallop with her arms spread wide, standing on her saddle like she owned the sky. They would tell them about Vincent Marlowe, newly arrived from Texas and nursing old wounds, who saw that display of skill and courage and chose to tip his hat in respect rather than react with fear or anger. And they would tell them about the love that grew from that moment, the partnership that transformed two separate ranches into something greater than either had been alone, and the family that continued to thrive because of the example those two remarkable people had set. And if the visitors were very lucky, if they came at the right time of day when the light was perfect and the desert wind was singing its ancient song, they might see what the locals swore they had witnessed many times over the years: two figures on horseback riding along the ridge, moving in perfect harmony, their forms indistinct in the shimmering heat, but unmistakably there, still together, still partners, still in love after more than a century of separation from the mortal world. Whether those sightings were real, whether Vincent and Felicity truly did ride together still in some form beyond human understanding, or whether they were simply the product of desert mirages and the human need to believe that true love transcended death, did not really matter. What mattered was that people continued to tell their story, to be inspired by their example, and to strive in their own lives for the kind of partnership and devotion that the Marlowes had achieved. Because in the end, that was the greatest gift Vincent and Felicity had given to the world: not just a successful ranch or a thriving family, but proof that it was possible to find someone who saw you completely, respected you fully, and loved you unconditionally. And that when you found that person and committed yourself to building a life together, you could create something that lasted forever, not just in memory, but in the living reality of the legacy you left behind. Their story began with a woman standing on a saddle at full gallop, defying gravity and convention with equal ease, and with a man wise enough to tip his hat and shut his mouth, recognizing that sometimes the best response to greatness was simple respect. And it continued through 57 years of marriage, through children and grandchildren, through challenges overcome and joys celebrated, through the building of something that would outlast them both by generations. And even now, long after their bodies had returned to the Nevada earth they had loved and nurtured, their spirits lived on in the land they had shaped, in the family they had created, in the values they had instilled, and in the love story that continued to inspire everyone who heard it. They had proven that the Wild West was not just about violence and adventure, though those things existed, but also about the quieter, more enduring victories of love and partnership, of respect and devotion, of building something meaningful together that could withstand the test of time. Vincent and Felicity Marlowe had lived and loved and created a legacy that would last as long as there was a Nevada desert, as long as there were people who believed in the power of true partnership, as long as there were hearts brave enough to reach for the kind of love that transformed everything it touched. Their story was a gift to all who came after, A reminder that the greatest adventures were not always the ones that made headlines or entered the history books, but the ones lived out in the daily choices to respect, support, and cherish the person you had chosen to walk beside through all the days of your life.